Welcome back to another episode of Cody Builds. On tonight's episode, we're going to be following up on the welding table modifications that I did on this cheap Harbor Freight welding table. And then we're also going to be creating a rack to store all the modular tools that I designed for this welding table. I'm going to take you through how to build that rack, and I'm going to set up a couple of new tools to go on this rack. So if you're interested in any of that, stick around. Let's get to work. All right, I did want to give you guys a quick update on all of the modifications that I did on this table. There was a lot of people that saw that video, and I wanted to follow up because I hadn't actually used the table at that point. I just modified it. So let's quickly go through kind of the pros and cons of each of the modifications that I did. First up, the modular hitch that we put in here. I think this is fantastic. I've not had any issues with this. Of course, when I'm using my vise is oversized for the table for sure, but it's the only vise that had pipe jaws on it at Harbor Freight. So that's why I went with that vise. I'm not using that vise to like leverage on things a whole lot. I'm mostly using it to clamp, hold things up, hold pieces together, hold something that I'm cutting. If you were going to be, trying to pry things apart using that vise, I'm not sure this table would be the best option. This would be a good time to have something like this attached into your workbench somewhere so that you could move your vise to something more permanent, and then you could really wrench on something. That's kind of the purpose of having this modular system, is being able to use different attachments on the table and also being able to move those attachments somewhere else if need be. Just to quickly address that, because I did see some comments, oh, you're gonna fold that table in half. I guess if I was really prying on it, I would, but I've not had any issues with it yet. The thinness of the table, I've fabricated a few things on this table. For the most part, it does okay. I do tend to get some flex and some warpage in some of my projects if they're not clamped extremely well. So this table probably does have a little give in it. That's to be expected, cheap welding table. It hasn't really impacted any of my projects, but just know that it's not ultra flat, and you can have some warpage if you're overheating your parts in certain areas as you're welding them up. I've experienced it, not to a big degree, and now that I've seen it, I can pretty much mitigate it by just taking my time a little bit and not just burning things together quickly. But that has been an issue with the table, so just so you know. Moving on down to these bars with the magnets, I saw a lot of comments about, oh, you're gonna hate having those magnets on a fab table. Well, yes, obviously the magnets collect metal dust, but I mean, it's as simple as doing that, and they're clear. So for what they provide, being able to hold these clamps in place and not have them flop all around, they've done their job. These clamps don't fall. I move this table almost every time I'm in the shop. They don't fall, they work just fine. The pegboards, on the other hand, they work really well. They're working for the intended purpose, but I do have things kind of rattle around on this a little bit. So what I've taken to is, you'll see over here, I just bent all of my pegs up so that everything slides back towards the pegboard. That's the easiest thing that I found to do. Even using shorter pegs would be good, but just bending those in an upward fashion so that everything just kind of slides back on them as a big bonus there. So I definitely do not regret having the pegboards in there. That's all really good. The shelf down here, it's a catch-all, honestly, guys. You can see how much dust and crap it catches. It was nice having like the vise and stuff down there until you start working on something, and whatever you have down here is going to get absolutely filthy. So moving forward, this is going to be my just scrap holder. Any of my little scrap short pieces of metal are going to go in here. I don't regret putting this in here, but this is definitely a piece of expanded metal. I saw those comments. I would definitely do something like that. That seems to like it would be a really good idea rather than the solid metal. Now this is just something I had here, so that's why I used it. I don't care enough to go get a piece of expanded metal. This is fine. It's absolutely fine. It just catches a bunch of dust and stuff. So if you know that going in, it's not a problem. Around on the other side, the casters obviously are great. I have no complaints about those. I've got this bar for hanging all my grinders and stuff. The one thing I dislike about this, it works for its intended purpose. The one thing I dislike is having all these cords. They get pretty tangled up sometimes, especially if I'm not using them. It seems like over time, just moving this stuff, they get pulled out and get kind of wrapped up in one another. And I find myself still going just to my battery powered stuff. So I don't know that I necessarily needed these grinders on here, but again, I think I got these on clearance in the return section at Harbor Freight for like 20 bucks a piece. So just to have the extra grinders around, that's fine. So I guess the last thing I want to address is the legs on this table. I saw a lot of comments about people saying that they folded the legs out from under these tables if they got something heavy and they're moving them around on casters. My experience with them is it's not that they're that flimsy, it's that the design is bad, especially on this Harbor Freight table. So I'm gonna bring you in down here on the lower shelf bracket here, right? And so what you've got in this shelf are these little ears that slide into these slots. They grab the leg and they keep the legs from pulling out, okay? I almost folded the legs on this table once, and what had happened was I didn't have any weight on this lower shelf, and this started bouncing around and it came apart just like that. It comes apart super easy. And so once the leg is detached, now the only place that I've got it bolted together with the pegboard and then these up here. If these weren't here, the only other place this leg is attached is all the way at the top. So it's very easy then for this leg to kick out and fold if it catches a crack in the concrete or something like that. I think, is my opinion, that most people that are probably folding their legs are because their tables are coming apart. Rather than run a bunch of braces on this, I think what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna run some self-tappers through these legs and into the bracket here to hold this together. So I'll probably do it right through here because this is already where we're pinching here. I'll run a self-tapper in each corner. I think that's gonna really suffice for what I need it for. I could imagine if you had a lot of weight on this table, that, you know, it's not the strongest thing in the world. If you had a lot of weight on this table and the legs come apart, like I said, it'd be very, very easy to fold these in. And so if you really want a good permanent solution, you could weld that shelf in. In addition to that, you could also come in here with a piece of strap across the bottom, weld or bolt that in if you don't want a permanent solution. So bracing the legs up in that way, I think, would make a big difference. It'd go a long way. For me, I think for my purposes and how I use this table, I think just running some self-tappers in to each corner here and holding this lower bracket in place is gonna make the biggest difference. Now, I also have my shelf all the way at the lowest point because it's gonna provide the most support across these legs. As you move up, you've got a longer distance between the floor and where your support is, and that could give you some issues, again, possibly with folding legs. Honestly, I don't think I'm gonna have that issue if I just run some self-tappers in here. So that's what I'm gonna do to support these legs, and we'll see from there, guys. Overall, I'm very happy, especially for the price that I paid for this table. I've used the heck out of this thing. I've used it for welding. I had my buffer in there. I used it for that when I was doing some engine assembly things. I used it as a clean table. I cleaned this whole thing off, got all the dirt and dust off the top of it, and I use it as a prep table for my engine assembly. So I've just done a number of things with this table for the price I paid for it. I still think it's a good deal. Is it cheap? Yes. Is it really like, if you want a ultra flat, like really good fab table that you're gonna use every single day, I probably would not buy this table. But for me, I'm using it as a multi-purpose table where it needs to be a mobile workbench in my shop. I can pull it around to whatever project I'm working on, throw tools on top of it. I can fixture some things up in here when I'm fabricating things. It's actually perfect for what I need. So that's kind of my few month review here on this. With the review of the table out of the way, the next thing I'm going to go over is this rack, how I put this rack together. This is all of my modular accessories that go down into the corner of my table here, so we're going to cover that now. So the top end of this rack for the receiver end, we're going to store all of our tools. I've got some metal pre-cut here. This is just 2.5 by 2.5 square tubing. The inside of this is 2 by 2, so this is quarter wall, 2.5 inch. The interior of this is 2 by 2, which is what the standard kind of 2-inch hitch is. So the square tubing on a hitch will fit right down inside of this 2.5 by 2.5 quarter wall tubing. So I've got 4 of those cut. I've got a couple tabs that we're going to use to bolt onto our wooden base. And then I've got some 3 spacers cut here. These are just 1 by 2. Again, this is just scrap metal I had from some other projects. So this is just what I had laying around the shop. There's probably better ways to do this, but this is what I've got available to me, and this is how I'm going to make up this rack. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mock up all these pieces here, use the welding table for its intended purpose. And we're going to use some of these fixtures, get these pieces all tacked together, make sure our design is going to work, and then eventually we'll come back to the table here, we'll weld everything up, and we'll get it mounted onto our wooden base down there. Okay, we're going to start laying out all the pieces here to get them tacked together. Now, I did buy some of these stops off of Amazon. These don't come with the table. What the table comes with are these little round ones. These work too. I mean, they're just, it's all kind of the same. These are just like standard fixture pieces. I just bought a few extra of these because I kind of like having these stops for the table. I found them very useful. So we've got our stops in the table here. We're gonna rest our tubing up against those stops, and that's what's gonna keep us straight all the way across here. So I'm gonna go ahead and start laying out how we're gonna do this here. All right, so you can see here, you know, we've got our pieces up against the stop. We've got our square tubing centered up. The only other thing I'm gonna do here, I think I'm gonna go ahead and put some clamps down in these areas so that we can keep this thing from twisting and warping in any way when we do eventually fully weld this thing up. So I'm just gonna add a couple clamps in the table here. I will say I think these clamps that come with the table are very cheap. They work, kind of, if you're patient. They serve their purpose, but I don't see them lasting super long. It's nice that the table comes with them. I will say that. It's a good setup to get you started, that's for sure. Those clamp down. Now we're gonna go ahead and tack up our square tubing here, and we'll slide this down and get the other pieces tacked in. All right, now you can kind of see what we're going for here, guys. This is turning out pretty nice. I'm liking this. We're gonna do a test fit down on our wood stand, and if that all looks good, then we're gonna move forward with just welding this thing up. All right, now you can see I got this rack set up here. I am gonna weld some tabs on this so we'll be able to bolt right to the wood here. So I still gotta do that. So the bottom half of this stand I just made out of two 2x6s, two 8-foot 2x6s. What you have here are two 41-inch rails on the bottom side, three 16-inch risers, and two 24-inch legs. And then I bought some cheap casters from Harbor Freight. Now, this is by no means the absolute best design for this. This is just kind of some of the stuff I had laying around. I had some extra lumber, and all the steel that I'm using is stuff that I had on hand. So maybe this will spark your creativity, give you some ideas on how you can design something that works out for you in your situation. This is just what works for me. Now, having these things on casters are important to me because if you watch any of my other videos on my truck build, I move stuff around my garage all the time. I'm only renting out half of this garage, and every night the other half has to be available for the owner of the garage to park a car in here. So it's important to me that everything's on casters and is mobile. I'm working in a small space. It just makes life so much easier. All right, I just threw a couple screws in the end of these brackets here, and this is what we ended up with, guys. This worked out great. You see there, we got the screws in the end bracket. Now, you know, this vise is actually pretty heavy, and there's no issues here. This isn't tippy at all. It works out pretty darn well. So I've got two spots left in this rack, and for those two spots, I've got two things that I just picked up recently. One is this dirt cheap pipe / tubing notcher. I picked this up from Harbor Freight. It was on clearance for like 30 bucks, I want to say. It was really, really cheap. The other thing is this bead roller. Now, the bead roller is pretty good size. It's only a 19-inch throat on this, so I'm new to the bead rolling game. I've never done it before, so I wanted to start out with something a little bit cheaper. I did get the drive system that goes with it, and it's going to be rather large on this rack. It is going to stick out past the legs if I have the mount centered on the bead roller, but I still want to set these up with a 2-inch pipe. That's going to correspond with the table here so that I can move them from this rack to this table whenever I want. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to break out the pipe tubing notcher here, and we're going to make the lower bracket for that. Now here's the thing, guys. These were sitting under the table. This is only on the table for one day. So just the project that we just did, and you can see just how much metal dust and crap is on top of it. This has been down there for a while. And if you look under the table here, you can see just how much metal dust accumulates if you're doing a lot of cutting and grinding and welding on top of the table. So part of the reason I wanted to make this rack is I didn't want all this stuff sitting underneath the table. Already I've probably ruined these buffing pads here. I might be able to clean them out, but I wouldn't use those buffing wheels on anything important to me because they've got a lot of metal dust in them and they just scratch anything soft like aluminum or anything like that. In order to keep that from continuing to happen, I made this rack that will facilitate mounting all these modular components onto this rack or onto the table here. That's the whole point of this. Let's break out the tubing notcher here. First, we'll make the lower bracket for that, put it in our rack, and then we'll move on to the bead roller, which we're then gonna assemble, and I'm hoping I can actually test tonight. All right, so I pulled this out of the box. There's not really any installation involved. The chuck for this was flipped 180, so I did flip that around, and in doing so, I realized that the pinhole for this chuck needed to be chamfered a little bit. I also really realized that the hole that runs through this chuck is not parallel to the bracket here, so it only goes in one direction. If I have it flipped, the pin doesn't line up, so it'll only go in one way, which is kind of indicative of a cheap piece of equipment here. For 30 bucks, what do you expect? You know, we're gonna give this thing a shot. If it really sucks, we'll just end up using these chuck pieces and this to design our own. You know, we'll just make one out of a heavier metals, a heavier steel, make our own bracketry, do whatever we need to do. So for the 30 bucks, I was willing to take a shot at it. Now what I'm gonna do for this one, I'm just gonna weld some of this square tubing to the bottom of the plate here so that it can sit down in the table. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut about a 4-inch piece of this tubing off and get it welded onto this bottom plate. Okay, this is the Eastwood 19-inch bead roller with the automatic drive system. It does come with a few dies here, an offset die, and then these dies here. The real criticism of this setup, now for one, with this specific one, is the depth. It's 19 inches, which as they say accommodates a 38-inch panel because you can technically go down from the middle of the panel to all the way to the edge, right? But the problem is, if you have a square piece and you're in the middle, let's say you have a rectangular piece and you're in the middle dead center of that panel and you want to turn it, you're going to end up running the panel into the side of the frame here. So it really doesn't accommodate turning a 19 or a 38-inch piece. It's much less than that. So the longest distance between the corner of your panel and the interior of your panel you can go is 19 inches with this bead roller. Now, I'm just learning how to do this, so I started with the cheap option here. This speed controller is compatible with all of Eastwood's bead rollers, so if I end up finding that this is not deep enough or I'm just really limited in its use, I can sell this one off with the hand crank and I'll still have the automated drive and I can buy the deeper set. Now, the other improvement that Eastwood has made to these bead rollers, you can see it's just a thick, like 1/2-inch plate backing that holds this whole thing. It has deflection in it, so I knew this before I started and I was willing to deal with it for the price. But if you look at the 2 fingers here, and it just as simple as me pushing on the dies, you can see the deflection. You can see the deflection in the frame. See that deflection? So that's going to cause issues with the sharpness of the bead. It can cause other issues as well. And what a lot of guys will do is they will box in the back of this frame section. You know, they might put a piece of 2x2 all the way down this, box it in, and then plate over the top of it with a notch in the center. And that's honestly how Eastwood has designed their newer versions. On their newer versions, they've got a second plate that runs on this side, and it's boxed in to take a lot of that deflection out. So, you know, even Eastwood recognizes that these things have some deflection in them. Now, this thing is set up to be put in a vise. You can just take this plate, slip it down in the vise, and crank down on the backing plate here, but that's not how we're going to use it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to weld a piece of 2x2 tubing that can slide into our receiver on the back side here. And I'm going to make that decision based on where the center point from end to end is of this setup, just for simplicity of storing on my rack over there. So I'm gonna flip this over to the back here. We're gonna mark where the center is, and we're gonna cut another piece of that 2x2, and then we're gonna weld it onto the back of this plate here. Now, I'm sure that voids any type of warranty or anything with the system, but honestly, this is a pretty simple, straightforward system. And again, if we want to modify it, make it better down the line, stiffen it up, we can do all of that down the line. So I'm going to go ahead now, flip this over, measure out where our 2x2 is going to go, grind off the powder coating, and cut us a piece of 2x2 and get it welded to the back plate of this bead roller. All right, you can see I've got the bead roller set up here, and it was always my intention to use the welding table kind of like the attachment table that you can purchase for these. So we've got like a feed through table here, and all I've really done here is I've used these stackable stops. Okay, I've got two of those. Those are 1.5 inches, and then this is a 3/4 inch piece of plywood. We'll see if it works. I mean, it's a little, it kind of moves a little bit, but it's actually not terrible. The other thing I'll probably do is I'll sand this down really smooth, so that it's easy for the sheet metal to slide across. It doesn't get caught on any gouges in the wood or anything like that. But for tonight, you get the idea and you see what I was after here. Now, the last thing that I want to do, and I'll show you actually here real quick, not the last thing I want to do, but I'll show you, we've got the foot pedal here. Works just like that. You got forward, reverse, and a speed control. I want to pull this thing off the stand, and I want to put it on our new stand over here and just see how it's going to sit in there and what that's going to look like. All right, you can see I got all my modular tool setups here loaded on this rack, ready for my welding table. And we'll see here, this rolls around pretty easy. It's not overly tippy or top heavy one direction or the other, even though I've got my two heaviest items on one end. It actually is just fine. There's no issues here. You can see it's not like top heavy one direction. It doesn't want to tip left or right. It's loaded down pretty nicely. It does take up a pretty good footprint, but the nice part about this is when I don't want to use it, I can just shove it right on out the garage until I'm done for the night, and then I can shove it right back into the garage. So this is a nice little setup. So with this thing being made out of wood, we could do things like put a little plywood shelf in here and throw on our jack stands, or, you know, we're really only limited by our imagination with this setup. So it's kind of neat. I think this is going to serve my purposes pretty well. And I hope it gives you guys some good ideas for maybe storage solutions for odd shaped stuff, larger stuff that's in your garage. So that's going to do it for tonight's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed the follow-up review for all the modifications we did on the welding table, as well as our new rack that we created to hold all of our modular tools for this table. I'm really enjoying this table. I know a lot of you guys purchased tables after you saw my video. I'm really appreciative that you guys watched that video, and a lot of you subscribed to the channel after seeing that video. And I hope you're enjoying the content that I'm putting out. If you are and you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing, hitting the like button, throwing a comment down below in this video. I would really appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Now, in the coming weeks, we're going to be getting right back on the pickup truck build. We're going to be working on a custom firewall using the bead roller that we just set up for our welding table. I hope you guys are putting your welding tables to good use. And as always, if you don't work on your projects, they will not work on themselves. Get out in the garage, get building, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cody Builds.